Yo, what the fudge is up, people? Hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're staying inside, staying safe, and staying healthy. All right, let's talk about fascism. We're going to be learning about fascism for this whole week, pretty much. And we're going to start by looking at Italy and a leader named Benito Mussolini. Eventually, fascism would spread to Germany under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. So it's important to know that while there are similarities between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, Hitler was not a communist. In fact, his party gained support by being anti-communist, and we will talk about that this week. But first, let's get into a general discussion of what fascism is. So what is fascism? First thing you need to know, it is totalitarian, which means they use propaganda, terror, indoctrination, censorship, murder of political opponents, secret police, no free press, no fair elections, etc. You should be familiar with totalitarianism because we studied Stalin. Secondly, there's a charismatic leader that can rally the support of the people, usually in the form of powerful public speeches. Fascism is also militaristic. It's very aggressive. It's anti-pacifist. It's ultra-nationalistic. So even beyond love of one's country, you'll hear leaders like Adolf Hitler preaching that Germans are the master race and that Germany should rule over Europe. So this is beyond nationalism. This is a whole nother level of nationalism. That's where we get the term ultra-nationalistic. In addition, fascism is aggressively imperialistic. Fascist leaders seek to enrich their country at the expense of others, so through colonialism and exploitation of colonies. In addition, fascism is anti-communist, whereas communism believes that everyone is equal, right? That's what Karl Marx preached, that everyone should be equal. Fascism preaches that people are unequal. In fact, there are superior and inferior people. And of course, Adolf Hitler would use this idea in Germany as a justification for the Holocaust, which we will study in the next unit. Speaking of which, fascism is anti-Semitic. Now, when fascism began in Italy, it was not anti-Semitic at first, but as fascism spread to Germany and the Holocaust began, the Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini kind of sought to kiss up to Adolf Hitler a little bit and adopted some anti-Semitism or hatred against Jews within Italy itself. So the term fascism comes from an ancient Roman symbol. So it is a bundle of sticks tied around the head of an axe. And this fasces represented Roman power and authority. And in fact, if you look in our government, in the House of Representatives and Congress, you see that fascist symbol. Now, we don't have this symbol in our government to represent totalitarianism or dictatorship. We have this symbol in our government to represent the origins of Rome and the Republic, when Rome was a republic and they elected senators, if you remember that from last year. So that's why you might see this symbol in government buildings in the United States. It is not to copy the fascism of Mussolini or to glorify the fascism of Mussolini in Italy. You see a lot of symbols of Roman government in our own government, right? Like the pillars here on our legislative branch. There are a lot more, but we don't have too much time to get to that. So how did fascism come to power in Italy? Well, it came to power under the charismatic speaking of and leadership of Benito Mussolini. Here's Mussolini's headquarters on the left-hand side with a giant sculpture of Mussolini's face and the word yes, 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 yes written across the front of it. Fascism offers very simple solutions to very complicated problems. So fascism essentially tells people whatever they want to hear. Whether or not that's true or not, it doesn't matter. Fascism is not concerned with the truth. It's concerned with control and gaining the support of people. So fascist leaders exploit or take advantage of whatever problems exist in the country. They take advantage of people's fear, insecurity, impatience, racism. In other words, the worst aspects of human beings, fascist leaders take advantage of to gain support. So specifically in Italy, Benito Mussolini, who you will learn more about in the documentary that I've attached, which you should watch right after this video. Most Italians after World War I were very frustrated. They were frustrated because in World War I they had not received what they thought they deserved. They wanted the territory that eventually became Yugoslavia. They did not get it. So Italians kind of felt shortchanged by the British and the French, that Italy deserved more for their help in World War I. So there was anger towards these democratic societies, the British and the French. And also, as you know from earlier studies, democracy can be really slow. And when a government is just arguing and you have political gridlock, most Italians were getting very frustrated. And Mussolini offered a simple solution. Get rid of democracy and just let him make the decisions. It would be a lot faster that way. So Mussolini took advantage of Italians' frustration with political gridlock in their government. In addition, Mussolini was a very charismatic speaker. He spoke very powerfully, very confidently, and his confidence gave Italians confidence that things would improve in Italy. Because in Italy, in the 1920s, even before the Great Depression, they were suffering economically. Most soldiers had come back from the war and they couldn't find jobs. Unemployment was high. So Italians were scared about economic depression, and Mussolini promised that he would fix that. In addition, most of the bourgeoisie or the middle class in Italy were very concerned about a communist revolution. Now, if you remember in 1917, Russia had a Bolshevik communist revolution. And one of the main ideas of communism is that it would spread all over the world. In fact, in Italy, there were many worker unions that were starting to lean towards communism. And the middle class in Italy, which had some money, of course, was scared of communism because under communism, they would lose any wealth that they had. So this fear of communism attracted them to Mussolini, who, by the way, Mussolini used to be socialist himself, but he would go wherever the wind blew. He didn't really have any ideals that he stuck to. He promised to destroy communism. So many of the middle class thought, well, okay, we might not love fascism, but it seems better than communism. And by the way, this same thing would happen in Germany too, where people would look at Hitler and say, well, I'm not crazy about him and his mustache and the way he speaks, but he's better than the communists. So it's this fear of communism that drives the middle class to support fascism, because fascism is anti-communist. Eventually, Benito Mussolini got so many supporters, and these men were militant. Many of them were former soldiers from World War I, and they were armed and violent and aggressive. And in 1922, Benito Mussolini took his black shirts, which is what he called his supporters, and with weapons in hand, they threatened to march on Rome and take over the city by force and have a coup d'etat, if you remember that term from Napoleon, a sudden violent overthrow of the government. Well, this violent overthrow never actually happened, and the Italian king appointed Mussolini as prime minister. So the king probably should have fought back and resisted Mussolini, but the king was afraid that a civil war would erupt and bloodshed would spread. So he decided that appointing Mussolini as prime minister would be the best bet. And from that position of prime minister, Mussolini eventually would create a totalitarian government. Again, this is explained in more detail in the documentary, which you'll watch after this. So a key aspect of fascism is militaristic indoctrination. Take children when they are young, brainwash them into being loyal to the government, make them militaristic and aggressive, and you would then gain control over future generations. So Mussolini called himself Il Duce, which means the boss, just like Adolf Hitler called himself the Führer. Apparently nicknames might be part of fascism as well. And Mussolini would have a generation of loyal Italians to do his bidding when World War II erupted. But even before World War II, Italy was being quite aggressive, right? Imperialism is part of fascism. So in the 1920s, Italy invaded Libya, right, which is on the northern coast of Africa. And then they invaded Ethiopia in the 1930s. They invaded Albania right before World War II broke out, and then during World War II, they would invade Greece. These invasions were brutal, especially in Ethiopia, where you have an African country that is not industrialized facing a European power that fought in World War I. The Italians were brutal. They used chemical weapons from airplanes against the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians did not stand a chance. Now, the League of Nations, if you remember, was formed after World War I to prevent another world war. Regardless, just 20 years later, World War II broke out, so the League of Nations failed. And it failed for several reasons. The League of Nations did not have a military force. The League of Nations did not have the United States as a member nation, even though it was the U.S.'s idea, at least the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's idea. And the League of Nations couldn't do anything to punish countries except to place economic trade restrictions or sanctions on them. So when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, the League of Nations condemned Italy, and Mussolini simply quit the League of Nations. Germany and Japan would essentially do the same. The League of Nations was like a dog with no teeth. It had no way to enforce what it wanted upon others. Here's a cartoon showing, let me just move it, showing Italy's aggressive stance towards Albania. Now, eventually, Adolf Hitler would surpass Mussolini in terms of power, but at the beginning, it was Mussolini who was the teacher of fascism and Adolf Hitler who was the student. Now, we'll get into much greater detail about both of these leaders later in the week. So for now, please watch the documentary that I've attached to this assignment, and then complete the document set regarding Mussolini and fascism in Italy. Stay in, guys. Stay safe.